Harold Jenkins was a man of routine. Every morning, he'd wake up at the same time, eat the same breakfast, and commute to the same job at the city library. His life was as predictable as the ticking of the grandfather clock in his living room. One dreary Tuesday, while shelving books, Harold stumbled upon a peculiar tome. Its cover was adorned with strange symbols, and its pages crackled with age. Intrigued, he opened it and found himself drawn into a swirling vortex of light. The next moment, he was standing in a cobblestone street, surrounded by towering, Gothic buildings. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the sky was perpetually overcast. A chill wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying with it the distant cries of unseen creatures. Harold realized with a start that he was no longer in the library. He was in a world that seemed to have stepped out of a nightmare. Harold's heart pounded in his chest as he cautiously stepped into the street. He looked around, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The buildings were old and crumbling, their windows dark and empty. A thick fog hung low, obscuring the view of the surrounding area. As he ventured deeper into the city, he encountered strange and unsettling sights. People with twisted limbs and glowing eyes wandered the streets, their faces etched with pain and madness. Gigantic, grotesque creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes fixed on him with a predatory gleam. A sense of dread washed over Harold. He knew that he was trapped in a world far removed from his own. But he also felt a strange sense of excitement, a thrill of danger that he had never experienced before. As he continued his journey, he stumbled upon a dilapidated tavern. A sign above the door read, "The Last Refuge." Mustering his courage, Harold pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The tavern was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of ale and tobacco smoke. A few patrons sat at the bar, their faces obscured by shadows. A grizzled old man stood behind the counter, his eyes fixed on Harold with a cold, calculating gaze. "Welcome to the Last Refuge," the old man said, his voice raspy and hoarse. "What brings you here?" Harold hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had no idea where he was or how he had gotten there. All he knew was that he was lost and terrified. I'm lost," Harold stammered. "I don't know how I got here." The old man nodded slowly. "Many have come before you, seeking refuge from the darkness. But few have ever found their way back." Harold's heart sank. He realized that he might be trapped in this strange and terrifying world forever. The old man leaned closer, his eyes glinting with a hint of amusement. "But fear not, young traveler. I am Theodore, the keeper of this humble establishment, and a guide to those who dare to tread these cursed lands." Theodore spoke with a knowing smile, revealing a set of teeth that were almost as crooked as the alleyways outside. He offered Harold a seat and a mug of something that smelled faintly of mint and rot. The warmth of the drink spread through Harold's body, chasing away the cold that had seeped into his bones. "You've arrived just in time," Theodore said, his eyes twinkling. "The Baron's Festival of the Grotesque is tonight. It's the one night where the veil between worlds thins, and those who wish to return can do so." Harold's eyes widened with hope. Away home, but the excitement was short-lived as Theodore's expression grew serious. "The festival is no place for the faint of heart. It's a masquerade of horrors, where the Baron's twisted creations are displayed for all to see." The Baron was the ruler of this twisted world, a mad scientist whose insatiable appetite for power had led to the creation of monstrosities that now roamed the streets freely. His reign was marked by fear and chaos, and the festival was his way of showcasing his dominion over the very fabric of reality. Theodore eyed Harold thoughtfully. "But perhaps you're exactly what we need. A pure soul, untouched by the corruption that plagues this realm. Will you brave the festival and find the key to your return?" The challenge weighed heavily on Harold. The thought of facing the Baron's creations was daunting, but the prospect of never seeing his home again was unbearable. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll do it." The old man's smile grew wider. "Good. I'll prepare you. But remember, the path you choose will not only determine your fate, but that of many others." The hours passed in a blur as Theodore outfitted Harold with a tattered cloak and a rusted dagger, remnants of a time when this world was still whole. He taught him the basics of survival in this twisted place and warned him of the creatures that would be drawn to the festival. As night fell, the tavern doors swung open, and a discord of laughter and screams filled the air. The festival had begun. Harold took a deep breath, gripped the dagger tightly, and stepped into the fog-choked streets. The shadowy figures that danced in the flickering torchlight beckoned him forward, and with a mix of fear and determination, he set off to face the unknown. The festival was a macabre spectacle of bizarre inventions and deformed creatures. Machines that defied the laws of physics whirred and clanked alongside flesh and blood aberrations that stumbled and crawled. The air was electric with the anticipation of the horrors yet to come. Amidst the chaos, Harold spotted a group of hooded figures moving with purpose. Theodore had mentioned that the key to his return would be hidden among the festival's exhibits, guarded by the Baron's elite. He followed them, his heart racing as they led him through a maze of tents and stages, each more disturbing than the last. The hooded figures stopped at a grand, velvet-draped stage, where a massive, twisted tree grew. Its branches stretched out like the arms of a giant octopus, each one tipped with a gleaming, metallic hand. Atop the tree sat a throne, occupied by a figure shrouded in darkness. The Baron himself? As the crowd grew silent, the figure stood, revealing himself to be a grotesque amalgamation of man and machine. His eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and his voice boomed like thunder. "Welcome, one and all, to the festival of the grotesque." The Baron's guards descended upon Harold, their malformed limbs reaching for him. He knew he had to act fast. With a surprising burst of strength, he sliced through the nearest guard's tentacle-like arm, causing the creature to shriek in pain. The crowd erupted into a frenzy, allowing him to slip away unnoticed. He knew he had to find the key before the Baron could claim him. The stage was his only hope. With a deep breath, he pushed aside his fear and darted towards the tree, dodging through the maddened crowd. The climb was perilous, the metallic branches cold and slick. As he neared the top, the tree's mechanical hands grabbed for him, trying to pull him into the darkness. But he was driven by a desperate need to escape this hellish realm. Finally, his hand closed around the key, a simple brass trinket that pulsed with an eerie light. Looking down, he saw the Baron's guards closing in, their eyes alight with rage. With no time to lose, Harold jumped from the tree, the key clutched in his hand. The fall was long and terrifying, but he managed to land in a pile of discarded fabric from a nearby tent, breaking his fall. The Baron's voice echoed through the streets, enraged. Find him. He must not escape. Harold knew he had to be quick. The key was warm and hummed with power, whispering of home. He sprinted through the alleyways, the shadows playing tricks on his eyes, making the creatures seem even more terrifying. Theodore's tavern was a beacon in the distance. The key grew warmer with every step, guiding him back to the safety of the last refuge. The festival had become a hunt, and he was the prey. As he burst through the tavern door, panting and exhausted, Theodore's eyes widened in surprise. "You've found it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Now, we must prepare for the return. The window is narrow, and the Baron's wrath is swift." Harold nodded, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had come so far, and he wasn't about to let the nightmare swallow him whole. He took a seat at the table, the key in hand, ready to face whatever twisted challenge lay ahead. Theodore began to chant, his voice low and guttural. The air around them grew thick with an unseen force, and the walls of the tavern shimmered like a mirage. "Listen closely, young traveler," he said, raising his hands. "The key will open the portal to your world, but it requires your blood to seal the passage." With trembling hands, Harold pricked his finger and allowed a single drop of crimson to fall onto the key. The metal grew warm and then hot, and a searing pain shot through his hand as the key burned into his flesh, leaving an indelible mark. The room spun, and the tavern faded away, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors. The ground beneath them trembled as the Baron's guards approached, their monstrous forms crashing through the walls. Theodore's eyes grew fierce. "Now, the portal is open." With a deep breath, Harold stepped into the whirlwind of light, the key pulsing with power. He could feel the pull of his own world, but the guards were close. The door to the tavern smashed open, and the creatures lunged at him. Theodore threw himself into the fray, his rusted dagger flashing through the air. The guards fell back, giving Harold a brief moment of respite. He took it, sprinting through the vortex, the winds of two worlds tugging at his cloak. As the world around him grew hazy, he heard the Baron's furious roar echo through the alleyways. The last thing he saw before the light consumed him was Theodore, standing tall amidst the chaos, a grim smile on his face. The library's familiar scent of dust and old books washed over him as he stumbled out of the vortex and onto the cold, hard floor. The tome lay open on the table, its pages fluttering as if beckoning him back. For a moment, he was afraid to look around, afraid that the monsters had followed him. But the world was silent and still. He was back. Harold's hand went to his pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of the key. It was still there, a grim reminder of the horrors he had faced. But the mark on his hand was fading, the pain receding with each passing second. He went home, to find his living room just as he had left it, the grandfather clock ticking away the hours of his absence. But something had changed within him. The mundane was no longer comforting, it was stifling. The world of the grotesque had left its mark on him, and he knew he could never truly return to his old life. The tome's whispers echoed in his mind. The adventure was over, but the story had just begun. The key burned in his pocket, a silent promise of more to come. And as the clock chimed the midnight hour, Harold Jenkins realized that he was forever changed. He tried to resume his old routine the next day, but the stale library air and the endless stacks of paperwork only served to remind him of the vast, decaying world he had left behind. His colleagues whispered about his sudden vacation, but he could not bring himself to speak of the festival of the grotesque. Days turned into weeks, and the nights grew restless. The whispers of the key grew louder, telling tales of a world that needed him, of battles unfinished and friends left behind. Theodore's words haunted him. The path you choose will not only determine your fate, but that of many others. Was he truly free from that twisted realm? One evening, as he stared into the mirror, the reflection of his ordinary life flickered, and the ghostly visage of Theodore appeared, his eyes gleaming with urgency. The Baron has not forgotten you, Harold. Your escape was but a setback. He searches for the key that bears your essence. You must choose. Ignore the whispers and live in ignorance, or heed the call and return to the fight. The decision was not an easy one. Yet, as he looked into the eyes of the man who had been his savior, he knew he could not abandon those who suffered under the Baron's tyranny. He reached into his pocket and clutched the key, feeling its warmth pulse in his hand. With a heavy heart, he returned to the library, the tome still waiting for him. As he opened its pages, the swirling light grew brighter, the call of the fantastical world growing stronger. He stepped through the portal, ready to face the horrors once more, to right the wrongs of a realm that had claimed a piece of his soul. The streets of the city were not the same. The fog had thickened, and the buildings leaned closer, as if whispering dark secrets. The shadows danced with a newfound malice, and the very air was charged with the scent of fear and desperation. The people had changed. Their eyes held a gleam of madness, and their whispers spoke of a world spiraling towards oblivion. Yet, amidst the chaos, he found a spark of hope. A resistance had formed, and they had heard of the librarian from another world who had dared to defy the Baron. They looked to him as their champion, their last hope for salvation. And as the whispers grew to shouts, as the key in his hand began to pulse with a fiery determination, Harold Jenkins understood that he was no longer a mere observer in this bizarre tale. He had become the hero of his own story. The resistance fighters, a motley crew of humans and hybrids, gathered around him, sharing harrowing tales of the Baron's experiments and the monsters that roamed the city. They spoke of a prophecy, of a traveler from another world who would bring the tyrant's reign to an end. Their faith in him was palpable, but Harold felt a knot of doubt in his stomach. He was just a librarian, after all, not a warrior. Yet, as he looked into their eyes, desperate for a glimmer of hope, he knew he could not let them down. He had to be the hero they needed. Together, they hatched a plan. The Baron's power was concentrated in his castle, a monolithic structure that loomed over the city like a malevolent shadow. It was said that the key he carried could not only unlock the portal to his world, but also dismantle the dark force that held this one in its grip. For days, they trained and strategized. Harold learned to wield the dagger with surprising skill, his body adapting to the newfound strength that seemed to come from the very core of the key. The creatures of the night grew bolder, their cries for blood echoing through the streets like a war chant. On the eve of the battle, the resistance gathered in the ruins of what was once a grand square. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. The moon, a sickly yellow, cast an eerie glow over the gathering. Theodore had taught him well, but could his newfound courage and knowledge be enough to face the horrors that awaited? The key in his hand pulsed with a fiery resolve that seemed to spread through his veins. It was time. They marched through the city, a ragtag army of the damned and the hopeful. The castle gates loomed before them, a twisted maw of iron and bone. The Baron's guards, grotesque unions of metal and flesh, stood sentinel, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. With a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world, the battle began. The clang of swords, the screams of the dying, and the whir of strange machinery filled the air. Harold moved through the chaos with a purpose, the key guiding him like a beacon through the storm. The Baron's chamber lay ahead, the heart of the horror. The door was a monstrosity of steel and sinew, pulsing with an unnatural life. As he approached, the whispers grew, the key burning hot in his hand. He could feel the Baron's presence, the madness that had spawned this world of pain and decay. With a final burst of strength, he shoved the door open and stepped into the chamber. The Baron sat upon his throne, a twisted mass of flesh and metal, his eyes alight with a madness that seemed to consume the very air around him. "Welcome back, Librarian," the Baron hissed, his voice a symphony of malice. "I knew you couldn't resist the allure of my world. You see, you're one of us now." But Harold knew better. He was not of this place, nor did he wish to be. He was the key to their salvation, and he would not let fear dictate his fate. The battle was fierce, a dance of steel and shadow. The Baron's power was immense, but so was the determination that burned within Harold. With every strike, he felt the key's power growing stronger, feeding off the very essence of the monster before him. Finally, with a scream that seemed to shake the heavens, the Baron fell. The room grew still, the whispers silent. The key in Harold's hand grew cold, the light within it dimming. The resistance cheered, their voices a roar of hope and victory. The Baron's reign of terror had come to an end. Yet, as Harold looked around, he knew that the true battle had only just begun. The world was still a prison of twisted steel and decay, and the work to rebuild was monumental. But he had made his choice. He was no longer a bystander in this tale, but a central player. And as he stood amidst the ruins of the Baron's chamber, the weight of his decision heavy upon him, he knew that this was only the beginning. The resistance fighters, once mere shadows in the night, had become his comrades. Their faces, once haunted by despair, now gleamed with hope. They looked to him, their newfound leader, for guidance. And in their eyes, he saw a reflection of his own determination to restore the world to its former glory. The city had suffered under the Baron's rule, but the seeds of rebellion had been sown. The people of the city, once cowed by fear, now stood tall, their spirits unbroken. The whispers grew into a chant, a call to arms that echoed through the streets. Together, they set forth to rebuild. The once grand buildings were now mere skeletons, the streets choked with the detritus of the Baron's madness. Yet, there was a sense of purpose in the air, a collective will to reclaim what had been lost. The key in his hand was no longer a symbol of escape, but a tool for change. With each stroke of his dagger, each step he took, the city began to transform. The metal tendrils that had entwined the buildings retreated, the fog lifted, and the sun peeked through the clouds for the first time in living memory. The process was slow, the nightmares of the past clinging stubbornly to the fabric of the world. Yet, with every act of kindness, every brick laid, the light grew stronger. The twisted creatures that had once served the Baron were rehabilitated, their forms slowly reverting to something more natural. But the shadow of the Baron's influence remained. His elite guards had scattered, some seeking redemption, others biding their time, waiting for the world to forget the horrors they had wrought. It was a constant reminder that evil does not die easily. The nights were still filled with whispers, but now they spoke of redemption and hope. And as Harold lay in his newfound chambers, the echoes of the city's rebirth lulled him to sleep. The city grew stronger. The once desolate streets were now bustling with life. The tapestry of the world was being woven anew, and he was its weaver. Yet, the key never left his side, a silent sentinel of the battles to come. For as the light grew, so too did the shadows, and in the distant corners of the city, whispers grew of a new darkness, born from the ashes of the old. The Baron's legacy was not so easily erased, and the fight for this world's soul was far from over. But Harold Jenkins was ready. The librarian had become a hero, a beacon in the night. And as he stood on the battlements, watching the city come alive once more, he knew that he would not rest until the last of the Baron's corruption had been purged. The key in his hand grew warm, and he felt the whispers of his own world calling to him. Yet, he knew that his place was here, in the heart of the fantastical. For he had become more than a man lost in a book. He was the story itself, and the plot was far from over. The city below was his to protect, his to rebuild. And as the sun set, the first light of a new dawn broke over the horizon. The world was changing, and he was the catalyst. The whispers grew faint, the memories of his old life a distant echo. The key in his hand was a bridge between worlds, a promise of home, but also a symbol of his newfound purpose. With a final look over the city, he turned and descended the stairs, ready to face whatever the future held. The journey had been fraught with danger and fear, but it had also brought him friends, a cause, and a destiny. And as the shadows grew long, the whispers grew quiet, replaced by the steady beat of his heart and the rustle of pages turning in the breeze. For in the world of the bizarre, he had found his place, and he would not let it go without a fight. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories, give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.